welcome to today's Conversations on Leadership. I'm Dr. Gilles LaMarche, your host. And as I do every show, I love to pick a leadership quote that links to my guest. And this one you'll see as being really the perfect quote for this particular guest. And this is a quote from John Quincy Adams. He said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader." And I can tell you that this gentleman has inspired me for decades to dream more. I learned to dream with him, to learn more, to do more, and to become more, which is why I chose this quote. So our guest today is known to probably most of you. His name is Jack Canfield. He's known as the co-creator and the co-author of the New York Times #1 best-selling Chicken Soup for the Soul book series, which currently has over 300 titles, more than 500 million copies in print in 47 languages, and believe it or not, includes 42 New York Times bestsellers. He's also the founder and president of the Canfield Training Group, which trains entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, coaches, trainers, authors, health practitioners like me, and sales professionals in how to accelerate the achievement of their personal, professional, and financial goals. Jack is a dynamic speaker. I've heard him many, many times, and was recently inducted into the National Speakers Association's Hall of Fame. Quite a feather for his cap. He's appeared on more than 1,000 radio and television shows, including Oprah, Oprah's Super Soul Sunday, Montel, Larry King Live, and The Today Show. Jack's also one of the teachers featured in the recent hit movies The Secret and The Soul of Success. He is best known success resources are the New York Times best-selling book, The Success Principles, How to Get from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And I'm going to recite that again, because you should be reading that book if you haven't read it yet. I've actually read it probably 3 or 4 times. But The Success Principles, How to Get from Where You Are to Where You Want to Be. And his latest book is the Success Principles Workbook. Jack, thank you so much. I know you're like a super, super busy guy, always doing great things, leading in all sorts of ways, but thank you so much for joining us on today's Conversations on Leadership.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Gilles. Appreciate it.
So do you think that quote was a perfect choice for you?
I've actually used that quote in a book I wrote. So yes, I think it's a great quote.
Okay, because for me, my relationship with you over the years, that quote really exemplified who you have been in my life. And so that's why when I looked at the leaders that I would want to interview for this podcast, I was like, Jack's at the top of that list. I got to get him on here. So thanks for joining us. So a few questions for you as we go into our podcast. You have been a servant leader for pretty much as long as I know you. I mean, I know your history from starting off as a psychologist. I met you and had you at my house before you were ever famous. And you haven't changed. You're still the kind, loving, soul, servant-oriented man that I met 30 plus years ago. When did you first know that you wanted your livelihood to be based on the desire to serve others in all the work that you do? When did you know? How did that come about for you?
I think it started during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. I was a student in college, 1962 to 66. Somehow I just got caught up in that. Like, I thought the world should be more just. I thought that people should have a fair shot at success. I thought it didn't matter if you were born poor, white, black, whatever. You ought to be able to have an even playing field so that you could pursue your goals. And so I volunteered I went to graduate school to become an educator, a teacher. And I taught my first year in an all-black inner-city high school in Chicago. And I became very interested in why my students weren't motivated. So I became much more interested in motivating them and raising their self-esteem than I was in teaching history. And as a result of that, I ended up teaching self-esteem building to teachers, educators for about 20 years. And then when the first Gulf War happened in 93, I revectored, because all the money dried up in education. I said, okay, I need to go work in corporations and public seminars. I was scared. I had never worked in a corporation except as a floor sweeper in a General Electric plant between graduate school and college. There's a way to make money to go to graduate school. And this one principal said, don't worry, they're just big kids in suits. So I said, okay, I'm going to go over and see what I can do. And they loved it, and it helped them. And then I developed more and more techniques for doing this work. But I've always wanted to make a difference. we had in graduate school, we had a visiting professor come and do a guided visualization to go back to when did you decide to become a teacher? And most people went back to third grade. They liked Mrs. Tuttle, their teacher, or during the civil rights movement or whatever. But for some reason, I flashed back to before I was born. It sounds a little weird, but I was literally part of a group of people floating through space, looking down on Earth in 1944 when I was born. Was the first, World War II was happening. And I just said, as a spirit, I have to incarnate, go down and help out. And everyone said, you're being codependent. They let them figure out their own problems. I said, no, I'm going back. So I came down, and I never realized that that could even be possible till I was a graduate student working in the University of Massachusetts, and that was in a seminar, and it seemed so real to me. So I think this desire to serve has been there since I was born.
Wow, that is a beautiful, that little part of the story of before birth, I didn't know that part about you. So thanks for sharing that. Along your way, I'm sure you've had mentors, you've had people that have inspired you to really become the person that you became at the service level that you've been able to deliver really across the globe to millions and millions and millions of people. Are you able to name like one particular person that had a tremendous impact on you, whether a mentor, physically interaction with, or some other faction of mentorship?
Probably the biggest impact was a guy named W. Clement Stone, who was a friend of Napoleon Hill, who wrote a book called The Success System Never Fails, and another one, The Power of a Positive Mental Attitude, and things like that. And I worked in his foundation for a couple of years and was exposed to all of his thinking, which was you have to think positive. You have to have positive expectations. You have to set goals. You have to have values that are clarified. You need to take action. You need to use affirmation and visualization. You need to respond to feedback. You need to persevere. You need to come from service and so forth. So that was the beginning. That's still the underpinning foundation of everything I do. Now, we've learned a ton since then, things like EFT, emotional freedom technique, NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, all kinds of meditations and different technologies to accelerate what we do from the 1960s, which is when I met him. And but that was the person for 2 years I was up close and personal with. Really, I used to call him a reincarnated Tibetan monk in a Republican body. He was like, he was so oriented towards success, but with such consciousness. And he was my mentor.
Beautiful. I knew that story, so I'm glad you shared it with the audience today.
Yeah, for those who don't know him, he was worth $600 million in 1968. So he would have been a billionaire by today's standards. And I'm sorry, I cut you off there.
No, that's good. I love the fact that you shared that. I know that, you started off, as you told me way back, because the first time that you came to visit, you did a full day, maybe a 2-day presentation, most of it to teachers in my little hometown of Timmins, Ontario, which is, you may remember, 450 miles north of Toronto. It's a little tiny town in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And you grew from that, the one-man show, to working so diligently and so hard to get the first Chicken Soup for the Soul published. I can't remember how many publishers you went to, but I think it's like 109 or 129 of sorts. But you always continued because you appeared to have not only, guts and a willingness to work hard, but you have a creative mind. How do you inspire creativity, or how did you gain creativity, and how do you inspire it in the people that work with you on your team?
Well, I think one of the principles of a good leader is that they're a visionary. You have to have a vision. You have to be able to communicate that vision to the people that are either your followers, your employees, your staff, the people you want to engage in the movement, like a Martin Luther King. So the reality for me was I had this vision of, first of all, the first book I did was 100 Ways to Enhance Self-Concept in the Classroom, which sold 400,000 copies just to teachers, which is insane. And I just literally went out every day and did workshops, and it just virally went out with Chicken Soup for the Soul. It took us 14 months. Let's go back. 144 publishers before we found one that said yes. It took us 14 months after the book came out to hit a bestseller list. We did something called the Rule of 5. I teach this to people. When you have a breakthrough visionary goal, You need to do 5 things a day, every day, 7 days a week, unless you want to take a day off for your holy day. And you need to be out there doing the work that's going to make that vision happen. And so you think 14 months of not hitting a bestseller list, you get rejected, you get disappointed, etc. But no, if you're imbued with a passion, then you basically are sharing that passion with everybody else, and more people get involved. So I went from being a one-man show with a Smith Corona typewriter, eventually an IBM typewriter, going to the post office, doing my own brochures, sending them out, running the workshop, to now having a staff of 12 people, and probably we have 1.3 million people on Facebook. I have 350,000 people on my email list, 315 Twitter followers, etc. Because we just kept doing the same work. Now it's evolved, but it's always been this mission. My mission now is to train 1 million people to be trainers in this work. We now have 3,500 certified trainers in 107 countries around the world. Now I'm beginning to certify trainers of trainers. And we've got a guy in India now who's trained 124 people. And what's beautiful is he's requiring everyone he's trained to do 2 free workshops a month to people that normally couldn't afford it, to learn these principles. People in prisons, people in halfway houses, kids in schools and orphanages and so forth. So we're building that into our work now. You want to maintain your certification, you have to give away and tithe your time. And what they're finding, the people that are tithing their time are actually getting more people coming to them and paying them as a consultant, a trainer, and a leader.
That's a law. That's a universal law, isn't it? That we give from our own abundance, excuse me, and the universe gives us back.
Exactly. Whatever you put out comes back multiplied. You put out negativity, you're going to get more negativity back. You put out money, you're going to get more money back. You put out service, you're going to get more things coming back to serve you.
So you briefly shared the vision of, I think, the Canfield Group. I can't remember the name of your company. I think it's the Canfield Group.
Canfield Training Group.
Okay, I was close. Canfield Training Group. So you shared the vision. So in your opinion, is that the most important aspect of your company? Is that you bond with your team and then your trainers and your trainers of trainers on a common vision?
Yes, we all have this vision. In fact, and you support that vision. I mean, every one of my trainers has a t-shirt that says I'm 1 in a million. Now, in one way, that makes I'm special, I'm unique, but also says I'm 1 of the million that are going to be teaching this work. Our goal is to do this by the year 2030. By 2030, there'll be 8 billion people on the planet. If we have a million trainers training 1,000 people a year, it'll only take 8 years to reach all the adults on the planet. So that's like a world transformation that we want to do. And everybody's living that vision and participating in it, and they're inspired by it. I always say, if Martin Luther King had said, my vision is to open a chain of 7-Eleven stores in the South, nobody would have signed up for that. But when he said, I want to create a country where everybody's equal and children are based on the quality of their character, not the color of their skin, then we all signed up, because that was a big vision. I signed up. That's why I taught in an all-black school. And I marched with Martin Luther King in Chicago and so forth. And because the vision was something that was compelling enough to make me want to play.
It's interesting. We talk about Martin Luther King. Of course, I live in Atlanta now. And one of my team members invited me this year on Martin Luther King Day to go to the ecumenical service at the Martin Luther King Center in downtown Atlanta. I will tell you, it was probably a 4-hour service. It felt like it was 20 minutes. I felt like he was alive in the words that were spoken from the multiple guests that presented, as well as in the musicians that played, in the people that sang, in the children. This one young lady came out, she could have been 9 maybe at the most. I thought she was probably about 8 years old. She recited, if you like, her entire presentation on freedom without a note, and it lasted 7 to 8 minutes.
Wow.
And you could feel the power of that vision. And so the vision that you have to impact the millions of people is being embraced by so many already. And so when you look at that now, compared to where you were 40 years ago, 35 years ago, whenever before you got the vision, what's the magic that happened in between?
Well, I wouldn't call it magic. I think once you have the vision and you understand things like the law of attraction, you understand the importance of work, you understand the importance of enrollment, you understand the importance of storytelling. All these books that are out there now about, you have to be able to share your vision with compelling emotional stories. So Chicken Soup for the Soul gave me the the platform, if you will, to share stories that were emotionally moving, just like that girl's speech that you just talked about. And so, you know, I think I learned the tools of being a leader. You got to walk your talk. You have to have clear values. You have to stand in those values. You have to be willing to listen. You have to be willing to hold people accountable to what they agree to do. There's a lot of aspects of leadership, and but I think the magic, if there's been any, was I've always come from love, and everybody gets that. People trust my motives. They trust my why. Simon Sinek wrote a book about your why, and if people understand your why and they believe you and trust you, they will follow you. And so I've never veered from that. Like you said, I'm still the same person I was when I met you in Timmins, and I intend to be that same person, perhaps a little more evolved, a little more enlightened as we continue to do our inner work. But I don't ever want to change because it's who I am.
Yeah, the kindness of the man that I met is the kindness of the man that I saw, multiple times in my life, whether I was attending some of your, 3-4 day workshops, or whether I saw you, one day live here in Atlanta, just in the current year. So I'm very grateful that that was your discovery and that you chose that path and have the ability with your reach to serve so many people, and reminding our listeners that Chicken Soup did that without social media, right? That was way before social media.
Ah,
So in the world that we now live in, can you explain the impact, if any, that you see social networking and Web 2.0 would have on you personally or on your organization moving forward?
well, it is having that. I mean, we have a huge social media. I have two staff that are in their 20s and 30s that are strictly devoted to social media. And, I approve it all, and they interview me for things that they can put up on social media, and we take pictures. And if I go to India for a month, which I did in February, they said, you have to send a picture every day. You've got to talk about what you're learning, and so on and so forth. But social media, I just watched a webinar recently about this book on stickiness, and the idea that it takes about 11 contacts with somebody, touch points. It takes about 7 hours of them getting to know you. They said of over 4 locations. So you have to be out there in the world where you are, like I am. I'm doing constantly, like next Tuesday, I will record probably 15 3 to 7 minute video pieces that will go out as social media over the next month or two. I will have a YouTube channel that has hundreds of videos on it. I am doing blogs, and I'm being interviewed by you right now. So there's this constant branding. Someone sees me on your leadership thing. They also see me on Oprah Super Soul Sunday. They also see an article by me in a leadership magazine. They see my LinkedIn profile, and so these touch points are happening, and they're building a relationship with me. And if the messaging is consistent over time and they learn to trust me, you have to like and trust someone that you want to do business with, whether it's business that I'm selling you something or business I'm engaging you in some social movement. You have to learn to trust me. I went to Jesse Jackson's church for over 2 years in Chicago when I was teaching in the inner city. And I got to know him and trust him. And the same with Martin Luther King. I didn't have as many touch points personally, but videos and audios and speeches he did and seeing him on TV and so forth. So the social media and learning how to do it correctly. There are books like Jab, Jab, Left Hook, or whatever it is, left, by Gary Vaynerchuk, where you have to give, and then you can sell something, with the other hand. And so many people are just sell, sell, sell. So there's no relationship involved there. How do you do social media? We now know that most people tune out of social media. 30% of people will leave a 3-minute video in the first 30 seconds. Another 40% will leave it in the next 30 seconds. So they're not going to get through the whole thing. If you don't know that, and you don't start with a bang and really hit people with something valuable, punchy, memorable, surprising, you're going to lose them. In today's world, people's attention spans are that short. So I go back to this. You have to study what it is you want to do. Inspiration is important, and we get that through meditation and meeting people and so forth, books we read. But then the work begins. You've got to learn your craft. You are a chiropractor. You're also an administrator of a university. You have to know your skills. It took you years to learn that, years to become a master at that, thousands of hours of doing it. And then you had to learn how to be a great leader and a great administrator. So that's a study and a practice. Now you're taking this social media as you're doing, and you're helping other people do the same. So literally, there's work to do. And one of my great quotes, I don't have it memorized perfectly, but Ralph Waldo Emerson said something like, "While others were sleeping deep into the night, I was working late into the night, and that's why I've attained, it's not sudden, but high flight."
Yeah, it's definitely not sudden, that's for sure. So I'm seeing the front cover of your book just behind you. I'd like you to take the book and actually show it to the audience so they know what the book looks like. There we go.
It's called Success Principles Workbook. It's my new book.
That's the new book. And I'll tell you, the Success Principles had a major impact on my life. So and I see that obviously to this audience listening in, there is a resource for you. We're talking to Jack. He's down home and personal. He's not going to tell you, go buy my book. I'm going to tell you, if you don't own the book, go buy the book. If you own the book and you haven't read it, read it cover to cover multiple times until you actually own the principles and are applying the principles. So Jack, other than that resource that you made available to the world, what other resource or resources would you recommend to someone looking to gain insight into becoming a better leader?
Well, I think there's some wonderful books on leadership out there. I'm not memorizing names of them right now, but there's one by Posner and somebody else that I think is a classic on leadership. John Maxwell's books on leadership I think are really valuable. And there's some books coming out recently by guys that were the leader of SEAL Team 6 and things like that. I am very impressed with the military right now. They're stepping forward, in our country and stepping up as they've done during, the coronavirus that we went through recently. And I think that the reality is that there's a lot of places where you can look for leadership, intelligence. And, they teach leadership at the military academies. Now, I'm not a big top-down command and control leader, but what they're learning in the military as well, and they're teaching at West Point, Annapolis, is they don't want their leaders to lead that way anymore either. So I would say, invariably, there's some book on leadership about every 3 or 4 months on the New York Times list. Read. I read a book a week. I used to read a book a day. Now I'm more interested in writing books than I am in reading them because I think I know enough to say things, and I don't have time to say all the things I want to say. But I still read at least a book a week, and I've studied a speed reading class. So read as much as you can. But here's the deal. Part of the reason I don't read as much as I used to is I was reading, but I wasn't always putting it into practice. So read something. If you get one good idea and put it into practice, Benjamin Franklin said, learning only occurs when a behavior has changed. And so self-esteem, which I call it, you got all these books on your shelf, but you're not doing it, is so you want to be doing it. One thing I like about the Success Principles workbook is we took all the work in the Success Principles and said, okay, what are the worksheets? What are the exercises that will really make you do it? So think of the workbook as a coach between 2 covers of a book, because we all need coaching. If we could do it by ourselves, we would all have done it already. So that's why being in relationship to listening to things like this, watching podcasts and so forth, but also be willing to have mentors, be willing to have coaches. And, I like to think this book, which costs less than 5 cups of coffee at Starbucks, can literally transform your life if you do what's in it. There are 17 principles done in order, because as I say, success is like knowing the combination to a lock. If you know the combination to a lock, you can unlock any lock. Doesn't matter if you're 7 years old, 100 years old, if you're a PhD or not. The combination of locks can open. You're missing one number. I don't care how hard you work. You have the numbers in the wrong order. How hard you work, it's never going to open. So learn the numbers in the right order, which is what I've spent 50 years of my life discovering, studying, and now, putting in books and so forth. I've studied I interviewed 75 of the most successful people in North America to find out what makes them so successful. And I extracted the principles that were common to all of them and said, okay, these are the universal principles of success. If you want to be successful, act like them, you know? And so these are the thoughts to think, the behaviors to do, the disciplines to have, and the exercises and the way to interact with people and communication skills and so forth. So I have read 3,000 books, so you only have to read one.
Wow, what a deal. What a deal that is for our listeners, isn't it? And I think what I grasped from that the last comment that you made is really that action eliminates fear. So as leaders, if you don't act, nothing really changes. You don't change and nothing around you changes. So we're coming to the end of our time, Jack. Closing comment for audience on today's conversations on leadership?
I think we're all potentially leaders. And, you know, someone once said, a leader is not defined by how many people they have as followers. A leader is defined as how many leaders you create. So you're in the process now of creating leaders, both in your school and also with these podcasts and so forth. And so every one of you can lead somebody, whether you're leading your children, you're leading your spouse, you're leading your church, you're leading your volunteer group, you're leading your local softball team, or you're leading a large organization like you're leading a university, whatever. So step up and be someone. When you see something that's not working and you have an idea, be willing to say it. Be willing to take action on it. Don't be a complainer and a blamer and an excuse maker. If you're not doing something to improve the things you're concerned about, then you're just being a negative bystander, you know, a complainer, belong to the Ain't It Awful Club, which a lot of people do. So have the courage to step up and be that person that says, okay, I'm going to do something, however small it might be, to make a difference, to make things better, to improve things in the world.
Jack, once again, always a pleasure to spend time with you. Thanks for your inspiring words, your insightful advice to all our listeners, and for taking the time out of your super busy schedule to join me for today's Conversations on Leadership. And on that, I wish you all a fantastic weekend and a great week ahead. Thanks so much, Jack.
You're welcome. My pleasure.